Settle yourself comfortably now, dear listener, and let your breathing become as deep and steady as the ancient winds that blow across the fjords of Norway. Tonight we journey through the realm of the Norse gods to a time when the world was young and the great ash tree Yggdrasil stretched its branches across all 9 realms of existence. This is the story of Sigrid, a young woman who lived in a small village nestled between towering mountains and the endless sea. Her people were simple folk who made their living from fishing and farming, who honored the old gods with quiet devotion, and who found peace in the rhythm of the seasons and the gentle passage of days. Sigrid was known throughout the village for her gift of healing. Her hands seemed to hold a special warmth that could ease pain and bring comfort to the sick. Her voice, when she sang the old lullabies, could calm crying babies and help the elderly drift into peaceful sleep. But perhaps most remarkable of all was her ability to weave dreams into the cloth she spun, creating blankets and cloaks that brought their owners the most restful sleep they had ever known. The villagers would often say that Sigrid had been blessed by Frigg, the queen of the gods, who presided over the home and hearth, over love and family, and over the peaceful sleep that restored the soul each night. They said that when Sigrid worked at her spinning wheel, the soft whir of the wheel and the gentle rhythm of her hands seemed to weave not just thread, but contentment itself into the fabric. Sigrid lived in a small cottage at the edge of the village, where the forest met the cultivated fields. Her home was simple, but beautiful, with walls of smooth stone and a roof of grass that bloomed with wildflowers in the spring. Inside, everything was arranged with perfect order and harmony. Her spinning wheel by the window where the morning light fell most gently, her loom in the corner where she could work while watching the fire dance in the hearth. Shelves lined with jars of healing herbs and bottles of the clearest mountain water. But it was Sigrid's garden that truly showed the touch of divine blessing. Here grew plants that seemed to thrive beyond all natural law, flowers that bloomed from early spring until the first snow, herbs whose healing properties were stronger than any found elsewhere, vegetables that grew sweet and large even in the brief northern summer. The garden was surrounded by a low stone wall covered in moss, so soft it felt like velvet to the touch, and in the center grew an ancient rowan tree whose berries glowed like tiny lanterns in the twilight. Each evening as the sun set behind the mountains and painted the sky in shades of rose and gold, Sigrid would sit beneath her rowan tree and spin. The villagers knew that this was a sacred time, when the boundary between the mortal world and the realm of the gods grew thin. They would often see lights dancing around Sigrid's cottage during these evening hours. Not the harsh light of fire, but something softer and more ethereal, like captured starlight or the gentle glow of the aurora borealis. What the villagers did not know was that during these twilight hours, Sigrid was not alone. As she spun her magical thread, she was often visited by the spirits of the forest, the hidden folk who dwelt in the spaces between the mortal world and the divine realm. These beings, invisible to ordinary sight, would sit with her in comfortable silence, their presence bringing peace and protection to her work. Sometimes when the night was particularly clear and the stars shone with unusual brightness, even greater visitors would come. Sigrid would feel a presence approaching through the forest, moving with a grace that made no sound on the forest floor. She would look up from her spinning to see a figure approaching through the trees. Tall and beautiful, wrapped in a cloak that seemed to be woven from moonbeams and shadow. This was one of the Valkyries, the warrior maidens who served Odin, the All-Father. But unlike the fierce battle maidens of legend who chose the slain on the battlefield, this Valkyrie had a different calling. Her name was Gunnlod, and she was the keeper of dreams, the guardian of peaceful sleep, the one who carried the souls of the weary to the halls of rest. Gunnlod would sit beside Sigrid beneath the rowan tree, and together they would work in companionable silence. Sigrid spinning her earthly thread, Gunnlod weaving dreams and visions from the very fabric of night itself. Their combined efforts created something magical. Cloth that could heal not just the body but the spirit. Blankets that could wrap a person in such peace that their sleep would be filled with the most beautiful dreams. One autumn evening, as the leaves on the rowan tree had turned to gold and crimson, and the first snow was beginning to dust the mountain peaks, Gunnlod arrived at Sigrid's cottage with an unusual request. The Valkyrie's normally serene face was troubled, and her eyes held a sadness that made Sigrid's heart ache with sympathy. "Dear friend," Gunnlod said, her voice like the whisper of wind through silver bells, "I come to you tonight with a heavy heart. In Asgard, the realm of the gods, there is great disturbance. The Allfather Odin is troubled by visions of the future, dreams that rob him of rest and fill his nights with worry. The other gods, too, are restless, their sleep disturbed by nightmares and omens." She paused, looking up at the stars that were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. "Even we Valkyries, who are accustomed to witnessing sorrow and strife, find ourselves unable to rest. The very air of Asgard seems to vibrate with tension and unease. The halls that should ring with laughter and song are filled instead with whispered concerns and nervous pacing." Sigrid set down her spindle and gave Gunnlod her full attention. In all the years of their friendship, she had never seen the Valkyrie so troubled. "What is it that disturbs the peace of the gods?" she asked gently. "It is the approach of Ragnarok," Gunnlod replied, naming the twilight of the gods, the great ending that Norse prophecy said would one day come to pass. "The signs are beginning to appear, and though that day may still be far in the future, the knowledge of it weighs heavily on divine hearts. How can one rest peacefully when one knows that everything beloved will one day pass away?" Gunnlod turned to face Sigrid directly, and in her eyes was a plea that touched the mortal woman's soul. "You have been blessed with the gift of bringing peace and rest to troubled hearts. Would you consider coming with me to Asgard to share your gift with the gods themselves? They are in desperate need of the kind of healing sleep that only you can provide." Sigrid felt her heart flutter with both fear and excitement. To travel to Asgard, the realm of the gods, was beyond anything she had ever imagined, yet she could not refuse such a request, especially when she saw the genuine need in her friend's eyes. "I will come," she said simply, "but I am only a mortal woman. How can I hope to help being so much greater than myself?" Gunnlod smiled, and for the first time that evening, her face held its usual serenity. "It is precisely because you are mortal that your gift is so precious," she explained. "You understand the value of peace because you have known conflict. You appreciate rest because you have experienced weariness. You can create healing sleep because you yourself have needed healing. The gods, in their immortal power, have forgotten some of these simple truths. And so, on a night when the aurora borealis danced across the sky in curtains of green and gold, Sigrid found herself traveling to Asgard. The journey was unlike anything she could have imagined. Gunnlod wrapped her in a cloak woven from clouds and starlight, and together they rose from the mortal world, traveling along the rainbow bridge Bifrost that connected the realm of humans to the realm of the gods. As they ascended through layers of mist and light, Sigrid felt the boundaries of her ordinary existence expanding. The air grew thinner, but somehow more nourishing, filled with a vitality that made her feel more alive than she had ever felt before. Colors became more vivid, sounds more musical, and her very thoughts seemed to flow with greater clarity and purpose. Asgard, when she first saw it, took her breath away. The realm of the gods was vast beyond imagination, filled with halls of gold and silver that reached toward the sky like crystallized music. Gardens bloomed with flowers that had no names in mortal tongues, their petals holding colors that shifted and changed like captured rainbows. Rivers of liquid light flowed between the great buildings, their gentle murmur creating a constant symphony of peace and beauty. But despite its beauty, Sigrid could sense the tension that Gunnlod had described. The very air seemed to hum with nervous energy, and even the magnificent buildings appeared somehow less bright than they should have been, as if a subtle shadow had fallen across the entire realm. Gunnlod led her first to Gladsheim, Odin's great hall, where the Allfather held court. The hall was enormous, its roof supported by pillars of living trees, whose branches formed a canopy of gold and green leaves far overhead. The walls were decorated with tapestries that told the stories of all the worlds, and the floor was made of stones that glowed with their own inner light. But the usual majesty of the hall was diminished by the obvious weariness of its occupants. Odin sat upon his high throne, but his normally piercing gaze was dimmed by exhaustion. His two ravens, Hugin and Munin, perched on the throne's arms with their feathers ruffled by anxiety. Even the eight-legged horse Sleipnir, who stood nearby, seemed restless and unable to find peace. When Odin's eyes fell upon Sigrid, she felt the full weight of divine attention, but also something she had not expected, a deep, aching weariness that reminded her of her own villagers when they came to her seeking healing. Here was the greatest of the gods, and yet he was, in his own way, as much in need of comfort as any mortal she had ever helped. "Welcome, daughter of Midgard," Odin said, his voice carrying the weight of countless ages. "Gunnlod has told me of your gift. We are in great need of the peace you bring, for our minds are troubled by visions of what is to come, and sleep eludes us like shadows before the dawn." Sigrid bowed respectfully, but when she raised her eyes to meet the All-Father's gaze, she spoke with the same gentle confidence she used with her own people. "Great Odin," she said, "I am honored to be here, and I will do whatever I can to help. But first, may I ask, when did you last truly rest? When did you last allow yourself to simply be still and at peace?" The question seemed to surprise the god, and for a moment his expression softened. "I cannot remember," he admitted. "The burden of knowledge, of seeing all that was and is and will be, leaves little room for rest. How can one sleep peacefully when one knows of all the sorrow that exists in the nine worlds?" Sigrid nodded with understanding. "This is the same burden carried by healers in my world," she said gently. "We see pain and know that there is always more suffering we cannot prevent, but we have learned that we can only help others if we first learn to help ourselves. May I show you something?" With Odin's permission, Sigrid began to work her magic, but not in the way anyone expected. Instead of immediately creating some grand gesture or powerful spell, she simply sat down on the floor of the great hall and began to breathe deeply and slowly. Her hands moved in the gentle rhythmic motions she used when spinning. But now she was spinning something invisible, threads of peace and calm that began to fill the air around her. As she worked, Sigrid began to hum softly, a lullaby her own grandmother had sung to her when she was a child. The melody was simple, but it carried within it all the love and comfort of countless generations of mothers soothing their children to sleep. The sound seemed to resonate through the great hall, bouncing off the golden walls and settling into every corner like a gentle blanket. Gradually, the tension in the hall began to ease. Odin's shoulders relaxed, and his ravens settled their feathers and tucked their heads beneath their wings. Sleipnir lay down on the glowing floor, his 8 legs folding beneath him as he released a long, contented sigh. Even the tapestries on the walls seemed to flutter less restlessly, as if the very fabric of the hall was settling into peace. "Sleep," Sigrid said softly, her voice carrying authority that came not from power, but from deep compassion, "is not an escape from responsibility. It is a return to the source of strength. When we sleep deeply and peacefully, we do not abandon our duties. We prepare ourselves to fulfill them more completely." She continued her gentle work, and as she did, she began to weave into her humming the stories of her own people. Tales of farmers who found wisdom in the rhythm of the seasons, of fishermen who learned patience from the endless sea, of mothers who discovered that the greatest strength often came from the ability to be still and present. "In my village," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "we have learned that the earth itself teaches us about rest. In winter, the fields lie fallow, but they are not idle. They are gathering strength for the abundance of spring. The trees lose their leaves, but this is not defeat. It is preparation for new growth. Even the great mountains rest beneath their blankets of snow, storing the moisture that will feed the valleys when the warm weather returns." And Sigrid began to sense other presences entering the hall. Word had spread through Asgard that something was happening in Gladsheim, that a mortal woman was bringing a gift of peace that even the gods had forgotten how to give themselves. One by one, the other gods began to arrive. Frigg with her spinning wheel, Thor with his mighty hammer set aside for once, Balder glowing with his inner light but also showing signs of the weariness that had touched them all. They came quietly, respectfully, drawn by the promise of something they had almost forgotten existed, the simple, profound peace of perfect rest. Some sat on the golden floor, others leaned against the living pillars, all of them allowing themselves to be touched by the healing atmosphere that Sigrid was creating. "The secret," Sigrid continued, her voice now reaching every corner of the vast hall, "is not to fight against the darkness, but to find the light that exists within it. Night is not the enemy of day. It is day's partner, the time when all of creation rests and renews itself. Sleep is not a little death. It is a return to the source of all life." As she spoke these words, something magical began to happen. The great hall of Gladsheim began to transform, not in its physical appearance, but in its very essence. The golden walls seemed to glow with a warmer, more gentle light. The living pillars swayed slightly, as if moved by a breeze that carried the scent of spring flowers and new grass. The floor beneath them became softer, more welcoming, like a meadow in the early morning when the dew still glitters on every blade. But perhaps, most remarkably, the air itself began to change. The tension and anxiety that had filled Asgard for so long began to dissolve, replaced by something that the gods had almost forgotten, a sense of safety, of being held and protected by forces greater than even their own divine power. Sigrid continued her work through the long night, weaving her magic not with grand gestures or powerful spells, but with the simple, patient craft she had learned at her spinning wheel. She told stories of peaceful sleep, of dreams that healed old wounds and brought new insights, of the way that rest could transform even the greatest sorrows into sources of wisdom and strength. Gradually, one by one, the gods began to drift into the deepest sleep they had known in ages. Odin was the first, his great head finally settling back against his throne as the raven's gentle breathing created a rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the world itself. Frigg curled up beside her spinning wheel, a smile of contentment on her face as she dreamed of all the homes she watched over throughout the Nine Realm. Thor, the mighty thunder god, lay down with his head pillowed on his arm, his usually fierce expression softened into something almost childlike in its peaceful innocence. Balder glowed more gently now, his light no longer harsh with worry but warm and golden, like sunlight filtering through leaves. Even Loki, the trickster god, who had arrived late and tried to maintain his usual sardonic expression, found himself yawning and settling into a comfortable position against one of the pillars. As the night deepened and all the gods settled into peaceful slumber, Sigrid felt a profound sense of completion. This was what she had been born to do, not just to bring physical healing, but to heal the deeper wounds that prevented rest and peace. She had brought to the gods the same gift she offered to her own people, the reminder that it was safe to rest, safe to let go of constant vigilance, safe to trust in the underlying goodness that held the universe together. But her work was not yet complete. Gunnlod, who had remained awake to watch over the sleeping gods, approached Sigrid with a request that would complete the healing of Asgard. "The gods sleep peacefully now," the Valkyrie said softly. "But there is one more thing needed. The halls of Asgard must be prepared to maintain this peace, to hold and nurture the kind of rest that you have brought tonight. Will you help me create a place where any being, god or mortal, hero or simple soul, can come to find the deep rest that heals all wounds?" Together, Sigrid and Gunnlod began to work on something that would become legend in all the 9 realms, the Hall of Eternal Rest. This was not a place of death or ending, but of renewal and restoration. Using Sigrid's knowledge of healing and Gunnlod's divine power, they created a hall that existed somewhat apart from the rest of Asgard, accessible to any soul who truly needed the profound peace it offered. The hall was built not of gold or silver, but of something far more precious: crystallized tranquility, walls that seemed to be made of solidified moonlight and gentle breezes. The floor was soft as clouds, the ceiling open to a sky that showed not the harsh light of day or the frightening darkness of night, but the gentle, pearl-like glow of eternal twilight. Within the hall, they placed couches and beds that seemed to have been grown rather than built, shaped from living wood that retained all the comfort and nurturing strength of the great world tree Yggdrasil. The air was filled with the sound of gentle lullabies that seemed to come from the very walls themselves, melodies that carried within them all the love and comfort that had ever been given by parent to child, by friend to friend, by healer to wounded soul. But perhaps most importantly, they wove into the very fabric of the hall the stories and songs that Sigrid had learned from her own people, the simple, profound wisdom of those who had learned to find peace in the midst of struggle, rest in the midst of labor, hope in the midst of sorrow. When their work was complete, the Hall of Eternal Rest stood as a testament to the power of simple compassion. It was a place where the mightiest god and the humblest mortal could find exactly the same thing: perfect peace, healing sleep, and the kind of rest that touches not just the body, but the very soul. Word of the hall spread throughout all the 9 realms, carried by the wind and the whisper of dreams. Warriors who had forgotten how to lay down their weapons found themselves drawn to its peaceful embrace. Mothers exhausted by the care of their children discovered that they could rest there without fear, knowing that their love would only grow stronger for the renewal. Even the dead, in their various afterlife realms, spoke of dreams in which they visited a place of such perfect peace that it healed sorrows they had carried beyond the grave. As for Sigrid, she found that her time in Asgard had changed her in ways both subtle and profound. When Gunnlod finally offered to take her home to her village, she carried within her not just the memory of her divine adventure, but a deeper understanding of her own gift. She had learned that the peace she brought to others was not something she created, but something she helped them remember. The fundamental tranquility that existed at the heart of all creation, waiting to be rediscovered by any soul willing to be still enough to feel it. Her cottage by the forest seemed both smaller and larger than she remembered. Smaller in its physical dimensions, but larger in its capacity to hold peace and healing. Her garden bloomed more beautifully than ever, as if the plants themselves had been touched by the divine peace she had brought back from Asgard. Her spinning wheel hummed with a new music, and the cloth she wove seemed to glow with an inner light that brought comfort to all who used it. But perhaps most importantly, Sigrid had learned that she was part of something much greater than herself, a network of healers and peacebringers that extended across all the realms of existence. In Asgard, she had met the cosmic forces that worked to maintain balance and harmony throughout the universe. In her own small village, she was a humble but vital part of that same great work. The villagers noticed the change in her immediately. The blankets she wove now brought not just physical warmth, but a sense of being held and protected by forces of love that extended far beyond the material world. Her healing touch carried within it a reminder of the divine peace that was every soul's birthright. Her very presence seemed to create a space where worries could be set aside and hearts could remember their true nature. And every evening, as she sat beneath her rowan tree to spin, Sigrid would sometimes catch glimpses of other realms, other times, other souls who were learning the same lessons she had discovered. She would see the Hall of Eternal Rest, still glowing with gentle light in the heart of Asgard, still offering its gift of perfect peace to any who needed it. Sometimes, when the aurora danced particularly brightly across the northern sky, she would see Gunnlod herself, moving between the worlds on her eternal mission of bringing restful sleep to troubled souls. The Valkyrie would pause in her flight to nod towards Sigrid's cottage, a gesture of acknowledgement between kindred spirits, both dedicated to the sacred work of healing through peace. As years passed and Sigrid's hair grew silver with age, she began to train others in her village in the arts of healing and peace-bringing. She taught them not just the practical skills of spinning and weaving, of preparing herbs and tending the sick, but the deeper mysteries she had learned, how to recognize the divine spark in every soul, how to create spaces where peace could flourish, how to be conduits for the kind of love that heals all wounds. Her students learned to listen not just with their ears but with their hearts, to see not just with their eyes but with their souls. They discovered that the most powerful healing often came not from doing but from being, from creating a presence so peaceful and accepting that others could remember their own capacity for wholeness. And always at the heart of their training was the lesson Sigrid had learned in the Hall of Eternal Rest, that sleep is sacred, that rest is healing, that in the quiet depths of peaceful slumber, the soul touches the eternal source of all strength and renewal. On quiet nights when the village lay wrapped in gentle darkness and the stars shone with particular brightness, Sigrid would tell her students stories of her journey to Asgard. She would describe the great hall where gods learned to rest, the Valkyrie who carried dreams across the sky, and the divine truth that even the mightiest beings in the universe sometimes needed the simple gift of peaceful sleep. But perhaps her most important teaching was also her simplest, that every person, no matter how humble their circumstances, carried within them the same capacity for peace that she had brought to the gods themselves. Every mother singing a lullaby to her child, every friend offering comfort to someone in pain, every person who chose gentleness over harshness was participating in the same sacred work that maintained the balance of the universe. As the years turned and Sigrid felt her own time in the mortal world drawing to a close, she was filled not with sorrow, but with deep contentment. She had found her purpose, fulfilled her calling, and helped to create a legacy of peace that would continue long after her own journey had ended. On her last night in the mortal world, as she sat for the final time beneath her beloved rowan tree, Gunnlod came to visit her once more. The Valkyrie appeared not as a divine messenger this time, but as the dear friend she had always been, ready to accompany Sigrid on her final journey. Lovingly, "Are you ready?" Gunnlod asked gently, her voice carrying all the love and respect that had grown between them over the years. "Resolute I am," Sigrid replied, setting down her spindle and rising from beneath the tree that had sheltered so many years of peaceful work. "Contentedly, I have done what I was meant to do. The village has others now who can carry on the work, and the Hall of Eternal Rest will continue to offer its gift of peace to all who need it." Together they walked into the forest, following a path that led not deeper into the woods, but somehow upward, toward the realm where all peaceful souls eventually find their rest. As they walked, Sigrid felt the same expansion of being she had experienced on her first journey to Asgard, but now it was accompanied by a profound sense of coming home. Behind them, the village slept peacefully, protected by the legacy of healing and peace that Sigrid had established. Her cottage stood empty, but not abandoned, for it had become a place of pilgrimage for those seeking to learn the arts of bringing comfort to troubled souls. The rowan tree continued to glow gently in the darkness, a beacon of peace for any who needed its blessing. And in Asgard, in the Hall of Eternal Rest, a new couch appeared, one reserved for the mortal woman who had taught the gods themselves the true value of peaceful sleep. It was woven from the same threads of compassion and understanding that she had used in her earthly work, and it glowed with a gentle light that welcomed all who entered the hall. The Hall of Eternal Rest stands still in the realm beyond mortal sight, offering its gift of perfect peace to any soul who truly needs it. And sometimes, on nights when the boundary between worlds grows thin, those who are deeply attuned to the mysteries of sleep and dreams can still sense its presence. A place where all weariness can be healed, all troubles can be set aside, and all souls can remember the fundamental peace that is their true nature. And so the story ends where all stories of true peace must end. Not with grand fanfare or dramatic conclusion, but with the gentle settling into perfect rest, the slow descent into dreams that heal and restore, the quiet return to the source of all peace and contentment. Let yourself drift now, dear listener, toward that same eternal rest, knowing that you too are watched over by forces of love and protection, that you too are worthy of the deepest peace, that in your own sleep you touch the same divine tranquility that Sigrid brought to gods and mortals alike. Sleep now, and dream of halls filled with gentle light, of blankets woven from starlight and compassion, of the eternal lullaby that sings all souls to rest.